Are you ready for the hot seat?
Diligence around technology at the M&A table is changing rapidly, but why? Here to unpack it all with me, Tricia Dell, M&A practice lead at Metafora. Tricia, welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you, Spencer. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited that you're here. Before we heat things up a little bit, Tricia, why don't you just tell us a little bit of about the work that you're doing there at Metafora?
Sure. So Metafora is an technology and operating consulting company. We specialize in transportation and logistics. So a lot of our clients are capacity providers, 3PLs, freight forwarders. We work with freight tech companies. We work with shippers. And then we engage with PE groups as it pertains to any of those prior buckets. So we'll do diligence through strategy, through implementation, technology selection, all the way through custom software development. And we've spent well over a decade specializing in transportation and logistics. It's the only industry that we serve. There's so many problems to solve here, which is why we've centered all of our energy and focus there. There's plenty of people like myself on the team that are super passionate about T&L. I've spent over 15 years in the space. We have people with 20, 30 plus years that all share that passion for how do we continue to move the industry forward.
Well, we have appreciated the thought leadership from your buddies Ryan Schreiber and Peter over there on your team. Our research team has said that you are the best of their team. So we'll find out here in a minute. So
we'll see about that. They are
so
awesome.
with that, let's jump right in here. Now, I kind of tease this about the diligence around M&A, and a lot of folks don't realize how significant this need is. So just kind of walk us through, just for context, the role. We talked offline a little bit about you serving a private equity group around a transaction. What were you asked to do, and what services did you perform around that transaction, so that we can kind of couch this conversation with a real case study?
Sure. So we, like I mentioned, directly with capacity providers and other players in the space, a lot of our work is around tech and operations strategy. So that is a range of services. So naturally, the diligence work that we typically are hired to do centers on operations and technology diligence. So we're going in and helping assess the existing platforms, how scalable they are, how defensible the moat is, making sure that the acquisition and growth thesis is realistic, and that the foundation of technology and how they're using it is something that can accelerate that. It's really the intention of, it's not just flagging risk. We also, because we spend so much time in the industry, it's actually figuring out where there's additional value and what that game plan could be right after the acquisition goes through. So you have a strategy, you're going in eyes wide open. Yes, there are risks, but there's a plan to close those risks or those gaps that are identified, and also hit the ground running so you can realize some value pretty early in your hold period.
So the speed of which technology has evolved over the last 5 years is unlike anything that we have seen in history. So how has the process of diligence changed over that 5-year period?
Sure. So I would say it's definitely shifted from a rubber stamp, check the box type of diligence. Do they have a TMS? Great. Do they have a bit of an IT staff? Awesome. Do they have ways to access their email and their calendars? Okay, great, we can keep moving. It's really evolved into buyers wanting to know, how is the tech enabling their business? How are they driving efficient workflows to expand margins? Where are there opportunities where they can really expand that offering or build upon the tech that exists to make sure that it's something that can continue to accelerate growth? One other trend we've noticed in talking to more firms is really going after that platform strategy. So finding a platform that they want to acquire, finding other acquisitions that they can make along the way as an inorganic growth thesis. Really looking at, does that foundational tech make sense to then integrate additional companies to help accelerate the growth? If that foundation is cracked or weak, that's a problem that you should solve today before you start to add a bunch more different integrations or different workflows or even different service offerings into the mix.
Yeah, let's hang out there for a minute, because I think this is interesting, because you're talking about putting in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars of capital to work around a deal, and much of that's going to be allocated towards this platform investment, of which they'll build around. Mm-hmm. So So what are some of the key areas that private equity groups in particular are trying to satisfy? Because just, the general strategy, well, let's just start here. Why is it so important that the platform investment be sound from a technology standpoint?
It's important for a couple reasons. One, especially just the hold periods themselves they've gotten a little bit longer with COVID, and I think there's some upside down valuations there, but there's still a relatively brief amount of time to realize the value. And so ensuring that the tech is sound in the spirit of, hey, the technology that got you here or what you were able to grow into may not apply moving forward. So if I know that we have to completely replace our WMS or our TMS 2 years into the hold period, I'm going to want to know that before I make a bid. And so that's where it's an important component to make sure that you're bidding in a way that makes sense. You're going in eyes wide open, but also you have a plan for what actually is required to scale. Other things that we really look for that jump out and either add to the value of the deal or potentially don't, is more looking at what the tech stack is itself. How does the management team speak to that? Is there intentionality behind the technology that they selected? Are they able to connect it to business outcomes? We've seen an exciting way, like one of the examples where we did the diligence work was that this company was able to operate at a level where they were doubling the amount of loads per employee that, industry peers and benchmarking compared to. And when we got under the hood, it was verified that their workflows and their automation components was exactly why they could do it. And so that PE group wants to pay, a higher multiple because of that, which is exciting. On the flip side, we also have seen components where the tech is pretty choppy. They've made integrations. So speaking about a platform, they've made other acquisitions that they haven't fully integrated. So one example, they were working off of 5 different TMS systems, which is fine if there's an integration and a useful way to leverage all of those different systems. This one was pretty choppy. And so the operational workflows were a bit messy. The data flow was certainly clunky, and those weren't enabling growth. It was almost like you had to pause to fix all of those issues before you could actually run. So those are kind of like the ranges of things that we see that make it more important for tech diligence that is beyond just that rubber stamp that I referenced.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about what you're describing is that there's a function of identifying risk, but also opportunity.
Yes.
And so tell us about, because, my initial understanding was that you guys kind of came in behind the fact, became behind an LOI, but it sounds like maybe this is more, or maybe it's both. But can you tell us a little about at what point do the buyers typically enlist your group to perform this diligence, and what's the desired outcome? Is this to formulate an offer? Is this to confirm an offer? How are they using you?
Sure, it's definitely both pre and post LOI. They are using it. Depends on their strategy, but they are typically using it as what else can we do if we were to move forward with this acquisition? So where is the value? And I think that's where our industry expertise, the fact that we spend all day evaluating tech and companies in this space, we're able to say, yes, this might be a risk, and here's a meaningful way to close said risk in a way that they can go in a lot more confident with the bid. They know what to do in the first 90 days. So we really, pride ourselves in giving them not just the diligence report of, yes, you should or shouldn't move forward. Ultimately, that's their call. We don't make the decision, obviously. But it's also, if you were to move forward, here's a realistic investment that you would need to make very rapidly to either close the gaps or an awareness you should have of, if the moat isn't super defensible and a big player could easily come in, let's talk through what it would require to make it more defensible. Or is that just something that you want to consider, and this is so specialized that it's actually something that makes sense for your portfolio? There's a range of strategies, obviously, that these firms have. And so we spent a lot of time talking through what their thesis is, ensuring that we're answering key questions that support that and answer it in a meaningful, direct way, instead of, again, like just checking the box and making sure that like the systems work and there hasn't been much downtime. It's far more not just what technology exists, but how it's actually enabling the business.
I'm very curious about this because the state of the industry, it seems like we're all a little bit overwhelmed at the kind of infinite amount of ways to innovate technologically. So as you're performing the diligence here, like how much of this is, you know, driven by like, hey, these are best practices. This is what we see best in class doing versus, I don't know how to say it, but I guess maybe another way to ask the question is, when your buyers are doing this, what are they most surprised about? What are some of the discoveries that they get in there like, oh, we weren't even thinking about that at all? Like what would you share about that?
Oftentimes we will review kind of the growth thesis that comes out in a sim, and so making sure that we're aware of what they're evaluating so that we can kind of tailor the diligence and findings to answer some of those key questions or verify that some of that is realistic. A recent example was a platform acquisition. The company had done maybe a handful of acquisitions themselves over the last 10 years. Part of their growth thesis was 1 to 2 acquisitions for the next 5 years each year. So obviously that's a material acceleration in like how many acquisitions they're taking on. And so one of the things that we looked at was what does an integrated acquisition even mean? Like how do they define done? Is there a playbook? Are there dedicated resources that will support those integrations to make sure that this is a realistic component for their growth? Some of those findings are that they're halfway there. Some of those are a very clean, like we need a dedicated PMO function and we make recommendations based off of that. So it really varies in what they're specifically looking for. We'll work with we have our standard diligence for sure. That's like, here's how the platform, especially if they build it themselves, here's how the platform compares to best in class within the industry. And we'll rate it across, a huge amount of different factors. We certainly do that. And I believe, and what we've gotten feedback from a lot of our PE partners has been the value is not just how it stacks up, but what we can do with it next. And, there's an example, one of the things that I think is super valuable, especially as technology's at the forefront of our industry, is the financial review could highlight, hey, they're making material investments in their technology. They have a lot of proprietary tech that they've custom built. This is an example from more of a specialized 3PL that we did some diligence work on. And so you peek under the hood there and you realize, yes, they have made material investments in technology, which is fantastic. However, wildly overspending because the tech that they've built actually isn't connecting in the way that makes a material impact to the operator. So they're still clunking through different systems. There's actually systems and apps that they had built that they could have bought. And so that's one of the things that we surfaced in the diligence. And we're able to say, hey, here's some real savings that you can make because you can sunset some of these apps, or your team can be a little bit more focused on building this centralized foundation, and we can kind of find ways to buy some of the surrounding apps. And so that PE firm was actually willing to pay a premium because they realized that there was significant savings they could see very quickly after the transaction goes through. So it's a bit of a range around how the diligence and what we surface and what's realistic to apply, how that kind of feeds into the bids that they're making. Yeah,
I really appreciate you kind of making the connection between, some of this discovery, whether it's, risk or opportunity, and how your clients ultimately value the logistics company, but also it can influence how they structure the deal. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about like how are some of the findings driving deal structure based on risks that are identified and maybe quantified through that diligence process?
Yeah, so I obviously the example of, hey, there's material savings that we can make right away. Let's go aggressively on that because we know that we can realize those. So that's one way. A more unfortunate, because we don't go into the deals looking to kill them at all. It is really to surface risk and highlight value or potential value. That is our MO. That's the MO that our team operates under. And so an unfortunate one was that the growth thesis was we can expand into an LTL service offering. It was a managed trans company that specialized more in full truckload and managed trans. The idea was we can expand into LTL. There's an appetite from our customers. Again, from a growth thesis standpoint, that makes sense. When we went in to evaluate the technology, we realized that the entire infrastructure and architecture would need to be completely rebuilt to accommodate LTL. That's not going to come out in a SIM or a management team presentation. And so making sure that it's realistic and you can go in and say, if I need to invest, a material amount of money to rebuild this TMS, is that still worth it? And how do I evaluate that? Ultimately, that deal ended up not going through because the risk was too high or the investment no longer made sense from their thesis. But, it's more fun to see where technology is moving the industry. And I think that's where it's been really exciting for our team to be involved in these conversations in the diligence world, where we can see when technology is applied and there's intentionality and a strategy and it's well thought out and it's adopted, how impactful that really is to these deals. And, that's people's lives too, where they're pouring a lot into these companies. And so when it's done correctly, and again, with a lot of thought and intention, it can absolutely make a huge difference that people are willing and excited to pay for too. So,
we were talking offline about automation readiness. And I was thinking about so much of our audience are business owners who at some point, everybody's going to exit at some point, either by choice or by force. But right now, I just sense this great overwhelming feeling with a lot of folks, just because hey, we're all in. We know that we need to invest capital around tech innovation, around AI, automation. But for some folks, it's okay, we've kind of dabbled here or there. We're making some improvements, but there's not really a roadmap. They're constantly questioning, am I doing the right things? Am I making the right investments? Or should I even make, is it going to change so fast that I don't feel comfortable making any investment based on it becoming obsolete in, 12, 18 months? I'm curious, when you're doing these, assessments, what could you point to kind of encourage sellers hey, not everybody is, at the top of the food chain from a tech sophistication standpoint.
Right.
But for small, mid-size logistic companies, what are the basics that they need to have buttoned down before they get themselves in a situation where a buyer's evaluating them from a tech standpoint? What do they need to show well within that diligence process?
Sure. So automation and AI, which is everyone's favorite word or least favorite word, it's kind of evolved into over time, is definitely a component of it. One of the things that jump out to us when we're doing diligence, and we do a diligence across the board, so it's not it's not always the big players. We definitely work with smaller and mid-size as well. And so some of the flags that jump out to us is how well documented their processes are, not just from a business perspective, but technology. How well do they recognize and speak about their tech stack? So is, again, coming back to the intentionality, is there connectivity between the IT org and the rest of the business in the spirit of what are we building here? How is it helping our workflows? How is it driving, dollars to the bottom line? Really understanding how your technology is impacting your operational metrics. I think this is where my own operations background of being in the space is important. I was hyper focused on how can we continue to do more and service our customers without needing to add a ton of bodies to it. And so there was technology at our fingertips. It's a matter of adopting it. And so being able to connect the tech to material business outcomes is important. And then, we do have a lot of people that want to jump into how should I be using AI in my business? And you don't need to have AI everywhere or this fully baked out automation strategy to, see a multiple or get interest from buyers. It's really just even having some type of narrative around what you're focused on, how you're cleaning up your data, how accessible is the data, and kind of what the vision is moving forward. You do not have to be fully live with all of these integrations and wonderful tools. That's awesome where it makes sense, but that's not necessary to kind of be at the table and have interest in your business. So it's kind of just getting started somewhere. a lot of the assessments and work strategy work that we do directly with the capacity providers is more around how, like I said, how clean is your data, but also there's a ton of fatigue, as you mentioned. So I've tried all these things. My team's not adopting them. I'm not seeing the ROI I heard in the sales pitch, or like we've spent a ton of time building and no one's adopting it because they're afraid it's going to take away their job. We've kind of heard it all. And so there's a lot of point solution fatigue too, instead of the zoomed out, like, am I going to attack all of my back office workflows? Where do I need to start and how do those all connect? It's definitely more of like this laser focus. And I understand why everyone gets fatigued. Their teams are pushing back. They've been in a million demos. Like it is this perfect storm. But those tools, when done well, are absolutely vital and will continue to impact our industry. And so it is important to have some type of strategy and approach to what those tools should and could look like. It just, you don't need to have it everywhere to realize, a multiple that you're looking for.
It's funny. I'm so encouraged by what you said, and I hope that our audience really takes it to heart, because I think what you said about technology diligence is true of every other area of diligence, which is like, what do investors really care about? I mean, they're not expecting perfection,
no.
But they do expect you to understand what's true about your business, and you need to be able to defend it via data, via SOP or whatever else it is. It's like, yeah, we don't do this well, but here's our process. We're working on it. We're trying to improve it. But this is our written process. This is how we measure it. It's imperfect, but this is something that you can bank on in terms of you can build off of it, right? And so,
we talked to a company that's probably like 2 years out from their next transaction, and they recognize they're on an antiquated system. That's okay. So a lot of our conversation was, what is the strategy? Whether that you're probably not going to shift out off your system in the next 2 years, knowing that an acquisition's there. But what is the strategy to move forward? How are you starting to think about tech selection? Can you put a number to what investments are going to be needed in order to more modernize and bring your technology into kind of where your business is today? That's also a component that we would look at in diligence around, like, what is the overarching strategy? Is there a roadmap? Is there a lot of thought that went into said roadmap? And does it make sense for kind of where they want to take the business?
I want to hang out there for a second. I had a conversation this morning, a couple $100 million freight brokerage, and they're in a spot that a lot of folks are in, which is like, hey, antiquated system. Know they probably need to upgrade, but they're also planning to exit within the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. So that type of capital investment and disruption within the organization for that type of change management is probably not going to be very constructive. But still, they got to make some changes in terms of their sophistication. So where would you point them to? Like, where have you seen some of your other clients where, they probably knew an acquisition was coming, they were going to exit, didn't want to have a wholesale substitution? Where were they able to make some gains in a measurable way between, today and that future exit?
I mean, some low-hanging fruit, if you will, for just like, what can you do now in a short period of time that will realize some value? So there's a focus on, if you have multiple different, tech platforms or apps, like, how well are those integrated? Is there a strategy to connect the dots, if you will, so that it's a more seamless or automated workflow? The way in which the operators use the technology is a huge opportunity across the industry. If I'm sitting in my desk and Spencer's sitting next to me and we have the same job, but we interact with the system entirely different, that is going to limit your ability to scale. That's just causing a headwind, if you will, on how well you can scale efficiently. And so doubling down on like re-engaging your team for opportunities for training or tool adoption. How well are you communicating different releases that are coming out, or different ways in which they should be approaching their day job, if you will? And so it's a lot of like that change management training, understanding where your teams are and their understanding of technology, but also how they're using it. That comes out in a lot of the diligence work that we do too, because we'll engage or do, you know, a screen share, if you will, of how are they clicking through the different systems, where is it clunky, where is it inconsistent, and when those are pretty buttoned up, that's a good indication that from the top down, everyone is invested in technology and how it can move the business forward, and it's a good sign for, hey, if you did need to change your TMS or your WMS in 2 years, we feel a lot more confident in the team that's doing it because of how well you've adopted the technology today.
I think that's a great point. Is like, even if they're, you know, even if we're not doing the right things, but we're doing them together and then there's continuity, like that's a great de-risker for an organization, because if you can do it one way together, you can do it the right way together. And so that's a great take. Let me transition back to the buyer. You know, what are some of the best practices? I mean, obviously, like the private equity groups, they come to you, they're trying to get as you know, as much transparency around the deal and the opportunities and the risks as possible. Tell us about, you know, when you look at the buyers, like what makes them best in class? Obviously, you know, this diligence, this is part of it, but what are some of the other things that you've observed? Because you're, you know, many of your folks, you're involved in very large transactions. Mm-hmm. What are they doing that separates them from the rest of the pack in general as a best in class acquirer?
A couple things. Natural curiosity is huge, both from our business being in consulting, but also from, hey, if I'm making a material acquisition or investment in the company, I should probably want to know everything. And so our preferred partnership, if you will, is one where they can just rapid fire any and all questions. There's no question that's too small. There's no question that's too big. We will share our take or what our findings are in support of that, so that they can, again, be that much more effective, you know, whether the acquisition goes through or not, in how they show up to the management team meetings or things that they're looking for, asking for the data room, or how they're even evaluating things that are surfaced in the data room. So the curiosity around, like, how is this business different? What are some things that they probably are facing in, like, an empathetic way? So how do I better understand what the industry itself is doing to this business? What are some risks that exist? And also, you know, if I'm the CEO or on the management team and I'm trying to figure out what's next for my business, like, what are they feeling? What's keeping them up at night? And so helping bridge that gap of our industry expertise. And a lot of the PE groups that we work with are incredibly brilliant people too. So it doesn't take much for them to catch on, but they really do lean on us for that insight and understanding, which I think, you know, the sellers are in a position too, where, like, they could turn down a buyer if it's not the right fit. And so making sure that you're coming from an avenue of, we want to grow this business together. We have, you know, a strategy or intentionality around how we work together and how this is more of a partnership. That's going to land a lot better than, I don't really know what's going on with your business, I'm going to leave you guys alone. Like, if that's not what a founder or a management team is looking for, then you're going to miss out on that deal.
Yeah, I love that. I am curious, you know, based on, you know, what you're seeing right now in the space. I mean, to what degree is technology around logistics deals, is that the primary factor that's driving the strategic rationale for the acquisition itself?
We've seen a range. There's certainly sometimes some deals that we've been a part of where the opportunity to expand or the complement it had to an existing platform was just too strong. So, you know, either the technology was going to go to the wayside and they were going to migrate to the platform, or the amount of customer expansion or revenue expansion was just too good to ignore. So there's those components, but certainly for a lot of the ones that we've been doing over the last few years, especially like post-COVID too, where there's, you know, a little bit of upside down valuation there, and really being more intentional around what is the investment that is going to be required if this deal does go through. There's not as much runway for, you know, money isn't as relatively cheap as it was, you know, a few years ago, where if you had to close some gaps or do some remediation efforts after the close, that was a little bit more acceptable. Now there's not that runway. Money isn't as cheap. And so really moving that diligence, further up in the cycle of the deal, if you will, is important to understand. I don't have a huge tolerance after close for finding out that you need a $2 million investment in your technology. Like, I want to know that before. I want to go in with my eyes wide open so that I can better understand what we're doing moving forward, how much I can actually expect and realize value. Those are some of the trends of wanting to know exactly what's going on in technology. So yes, it is a material impact. And it's just one part of the equation too. Like, we always center a lot of our strategy work around people, process, and technology. So tech isn't necessarily at the center of it. It's kind of how all three of those function together. And a lot of times we could be hired for technology diligence, but we're kind of a, if you see something, say something type of firm. And so if we're noticing things on the process or people side that isn't necessarily in like the direct scope, we take pride in surfacing some of that stuff too. And so again, you can have the best technology or, alleged best technology under the sun, but if you're not adopting it or your people aren't kind of in a cohesive manner for buying in and leveraging it, that's going to fall pretty flat. And so that's where I do think it's a huge component into how they look at the deal structure and how they think about moving forward.
I think that's great. All right. This has been fabulous, by the way. I think the great bearded one would be proud. Maybe one more question, a little bit of a wild card. Now, you, like many of your peers, you find yourself in logistics and you just can't get out of it. You get stuck here for a career, effectively. But I'm curious. I'm thinking about young Tricia, just has just got the formal education. And if you were not going to go, or if Tricia was not going to go into the world of logistics and M&A, where might a different turn, what career path would you might have ended up in?
Oh, great question. I have the answer because I thought that's what my path was. I graduated from Iowa. I wanted to get to Chicagoland. I found Coyote Logistics, thankfully, at an incredible time and incredible team. I owe a ton to a lot of my mentors there and a ton of opportunity, which was just awesome. I took the job thinking, it's getting me back to Chicago. I want to work for a big advertising firm. I'll be there for a year and then I'll shift to like a Leo Burnett or something. Thankfully, I also have a little bit of a short patience window for doing the same type of job over and over again. And so Coyote was rapidly growing. I had a ton of great leaders that I worked under. And so they were constantly keeping me engaged and challenged. And so 12 years went by before I knew it. And I had been able to do a whole slew of different things that expanded my skill set and made for quite the start to my career, and very grateful there. But otherwise, I'd be in advertising or maybe making movie trailers was kind of if there was a parallel path for me. I love that question.
Movie trailers. I actually have a friend that does that, and I think that's the coolest thing ever. So maybe,
never
maybe
say
when
never.
when you solve all of our problems in transportation and logistics, and you get bored, that'll be the next best thing. So,
that'll be hard and take quite a few lifetimes, but yeah.
Well, listen, this has been a treat. I hope that our audience was listening closely because you were dropping nuggets left and right. Thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon, Tricia. That's going to do it for us in the hot seat. We will see you next time.